I don't necessarily agree that metaphysics is unfalsifiable. This is perhaps true, but when we acknowledge the existence of lacks, things become much more interesting from an empirical point of view. Lacks are real in the sense that they have causal power in reality. This is interesting, incredibly interesting, from a metaphysical point of view. If this discussion is of interest to you, I recommend watching the interview I had with Daniel about the font I work on called Lexend. Lexend is a variable font designed to improve reading performance in school children by amplifying the spacing between and inside letter forms. This is relevant because, as opposed to presence being the cause of an effect, it is the absence between the spaces of a mark that comprise the letter that causes the improvement in reading performance in school children. This is reminiscent to the discussions of absences having causal reality as discussed within critical realism. O.G. Rose was interested in Lexend font because of its causal powers can be demonstrated empirically from its application on the lack and not the presence of the letter forms. When O.G. Rose talks about physicalism, I take it to mean the school of philosophy called materialism. That is, the only things that exist are material. I do agree with O.G. Rose's critique of materialism because, as Aristotle states, where there is matter, there is always form. For example, water is not merely the bundling of 2 hydrogen with 1 oxygen by just quantifying matter by a count. Water is also the positive and negative charge of hydrogen and water particles, and the distribution of the mass of oxygen to the mass of 2 hydrogens in a particular angular relationship of 104.5 degrees between the 2 hydrogen and oxygen molecules. All of this description I've just stated, are not material, but rather arrangements and forms that make water what it is to be water. I mean to say that all the properties and behavior scientists will discuss about water is derivative not just from its material of hydrogen and oxygen and counting of it, but also the arrangement of that matter with a particular distribution, which is all form. I'm reminded of a book I read recently on Thomas Aquinas' account of aesthetics by Umberto Eco. Eco makes a robust explanation of beauty as formal rather than material. And a passage I believe will be of great interest to all of us here is a description of proportion between existence and essence. I quote below from pages 84 to 85. Another type is the proportion between essence and existence. This is such a basic idea that it can be easily overlooked. But there is for Aquinas a natural and necessary relation, a relation of fitness, between a thing's existence and the energy of its act of existence. It is the same kind of relation as the relation between potency and act. For in whatever thing we find two, one of which is the complement of the other, the proportion of one of them to the other is as the proportion of potentiality to act. For nothing is completed except by its proper act. Now, being itself is the complement of the existing substance. This passage also helps to clarify the question of whether beauty is a transcendental. For it seems that a thing has proportion because it exists, because it is. I think maybe to say to be in the act of combining its essence with its existence. And this act involves a proportion, a concurrence, a harmony. This proportion, furthermore, is constitutive of beauty. Thus, everything is beautiful insofar as it is, because it is in virtue of a harmony of essence with existence. Something is beautiful insofar as it is, and it is insofar it is beautiful, and it has beauty in that it has proportion. This aspect of Aquinas' thinking, which has not to my knowledge been previously expounded in terms of proportion, clearly places beauty on a very rarefied metaphysical level. As we shall see in due course, people find it difficult to perceive this kind of ontological beauty. in part because of its absolute evidence and simplicity, and in part because of the depth of thought required to grasp it, possible only, perhaps, for the creative mind. But it is a type of beauty demanded by the logic of Aquinas' system. End of quote. I believe a much better explanation of this proportion of existence and essence can be described using presence and lack. I will describe this idea with much more detail in the article I am writing, Rethinking Thomas Aquinas' account of the angels using presence and lack as opposed to his attempt using potency and act. I'm reminded here of the account of substantial form. There is a difference between a severed hand and the hand of a person that is still attached to the person. The detached hand will rot and decay, while the hand that is still attached to the person continues to exist so long as that person continues to exist. The part is dependent on the whole of a person to continue to exist. To apprehend meaning, sometimes metaphor and analogy are much more effective than explicit statements of univocity. For example, the Schenectady used when we say, "By his hand he struck down that wicked man," says much more than the explicit statement of a person, I believe deserving, received punishment. End of reply to O.G. Rose's Permagalia of a Metaphysics of Lack.